Hello and welcome to ZHK-Extra, and today we'll be discussing the menace of so-called honor killings in Pakistan, which had until last year had consumed more than 1,000 lives, and this year also more than 500 women have been killed in the name of honor, and the cases are going on. Today I'm joined by our former colleague Alia, Chughtai, Zarrar, usual suspect, and Ali Khan, who's a journalist and who's done an investigative piece for Herald, which has been the cover story. So let me start with you, Annie. You have gone back to the cases that have happened in April, particularly Amreen Riyasat, a very famous case in Abbottabad, which had sent shockwaves all across Pakistan, and then to the Maria case, which happened in Murray. And other cases, Zainab Bibi in Lahore, Muqaddas Bibi in Gujranwala, Fawzia Salim.
Kandil Baloch, we know better as Kandil Baloch.
Exactly, who's better known as Kandil Baloch. So, during your story, what did you find out? Because it's always once these cases are highlighted in the media, a lot of hue and cry has been made. People call for stricter laws, stricter actions, and suddenly they fade away.
Right. Perhaps those are the questions that I was wondering about. You know, I guess I was receiving the same way as everyone else was, and thinking that, you know, and it seemed sort of that in April and May they seemed to be just like
epidemic.
Yeah, there just seemed to be too many cases, and you know, I remember going to the Dawn offices and talking to my editor about this, that I wanted to do this story, but I just didn't know how to go about doing it. And I would go to the archives and go through the archives and see how, you know, these crimes are covered, and it seemed that there was a certain pattern to it, even the coverage, and it seemed sort of unreal that all of these cases, despite wherever they're happening in Pakistan, that they would be covered more or less the same way. That was very interesting.
What do you mean when you say covered more or less?
Well, so here's the thing. So like, you know, I would actually have a copy of this, but you know, I would note down the headlines, right? And so it would say something like, man kills daughter, man kills wife for honor, man kills sister, and it's always this man committing a crime, and you know, and the woman sort of being addressed in relation to the man, and I thought it was very interesting.
Or as a victim.
Or as a victim,
and she is in this case.
And always using the word honor, and it seemed to me that there were just far too many cases being covered that way, and perhaps it requires further investigation. And so
if I just interrupt you, are you saying that basically this gets swept under the rug of honor killings, but in many cases the underlying motives may be different? Is that what you're saying?
I guess what I'm saying is that it seemed that whatever the reasons may be, it just can't be that one word or just like one definition of it
encapsulates everything.
How can that contain all of these crimes that are happening all over the place? How can we say that all of these men or whoever the perpetrators are being driven by the same reasons?
All right, let's go into the specifics of the case.
Sure.
Once you reach Abbottabad, the Makol village where Amreen Riyasat was brutally killed, she was burnt, horror images were splashed all over the media. Now you went there after almost 3 months, and so could you find what was the environment there? I mean, the atmosphere, people still are coming to terms with that case, or you think that
and more to the point, do people actually think she was murdered?
Yeah,
because there was this there was a lot of confusion about that. Also, initial reports where she was murdered, but then there were counter reports, no, it was a suicide. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, the fact-finding commission also ruled this as a suicide. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
But my question also would be, in addition to the Amreen case, is that when you did go back to the locations where these people are from, did you see any kind of PTSD amongst any of the younger girls, or was that meant to be a lesson that was being taught? Has it given women a sort of a lesson to be learned and never to step out of line? Is that the case?
I guess that question applies more to Maria's case. We actually met the sisters. In Ambreen's case, it was a little more difficult, and I guess maybe I should talk about this.
The stories.
Yes.
And
that was I think that's the thing with all these cases, that they're very different from each other. And initially, I was a little reluctant to cover it this way. I thought perhaps I should just work on one case in depth. In detail, but then I think the way it's sort of come together, I think it highlights the problem precisely with the way they treat it. Perhaps, I mean, I don't know. I guess that's not my place to say, but
fair enough.
But with Ambreen's case, when I started out, I had no idea. You know, I just gleaned information from whatever news coverage there had been. I spoke to a couple of colleagues, and one of them did mention the fact that the word jirga is being mentioned constantly, but he didn't feel that that was perhaps the case, and he said that's something you should keep an ear out for. So that was interesting at the outset. Before I even went there, it seemed like there was just so much more confusion than actual answers regarding this case, and I think that the moment I arrived, I remember my first experience was, I spoke to one of the local reporters, and he said, why don't you go to the market in Makol, which is the area actually in Abbottabad where this is. It's actually not in Abbottabad. You have to drive up to get to the area. And he said that, Bazaar Jain, you can ask anyone there and they'll lead you to this. And, it's a very famous case. We're all talking about it. So immediately there was a sense that, okay, there's a narrative that's out there in the marketplace, and then there's a narrative that actually happened with the family, and I
So what's
felt
the marketplace narrative?
So when I went to the market, there was I literally showed up at the market, by the way. So there are no, the way you get around in Abbottabad is you get a dabba gadi, a high roof, and you hire that, and you go. So I did that. I got one of the locals to drive me there, and we showed up at the market, and there was a cobbler, and I went up and I asked him, and he said, Gigi, I know about this. I'm not from the same biradri, but this is the case, and this is just very confusing. We're not sure ourselves what this is about, but these things do happen sometimes. But what seemed very interesting was I said, this is such a small place. You're walking distance from the house. How do you not know?
What was your conclusion in all of these cases? That did you find any clue from either the lawyers, from either the community, that they are now taking the case to the eventuality, which is like to punish the people who are involved in it, or you think that they will be hushed up like other cases that happened in the past?
I think more importantly, I think what I discovered that really for me was something very important regarding this case was the disjuncture between what happens and then the way it's talked about and then the way it's prosecuted, right? There's a huge difference, and there's a huge distance between all of these things.
And what about the role of what television has to play in it, in terms of how much they actually report to what the backstory actually is? Because I feel strongly in many of these stories, what you have put down in the cover story, there's so many more details that television actually leaves out. Because in this world of like sort of one breaking news to the next, there's a backstory to each one of these stories, and the circumstances
gets misinterpreted.
Yes, and the backstory, the circumstances. The circumstances are different.
News
have a lot of luxury of space
in detail. Alia, you had some statistics with you, because most of these cases happened in Punjab.
Yes, all of these cases have happened in Punjab, and majority of the cases, I mean, the data that I've managed to come across is from the Law and Order Unit in the Chief Minister's office in Punjab.
So they're the official stats, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And from what they have told me, in 2015 we had 232 reported cases, right? Out of which the nominated accused were 294. 71 acquitted and only 7 punished, and 48 cases were compromised.
So did you ask
compromised due to lack of evidence and witnesses deciding?
The whole term of honor killing, the family's pardon. Yes. And also in 2016 we so far have 105 reported cases. This includes Fawzia Azim, Kandil Baloch. Nominated accused 161, accused acquitted only 1 so far, 0 punished and 0 cases compromised, because the 2016 cases are all open and they're all ongoing, and plus at the same time the Women's Protection Bill in the Punjab Assembly was passed. So they're obviously hopeful that things are going to change.
But I think a long way to go, because they don't have the infrastructure yet.
Well, the district centres are about to open, from what I've been told, but that's a whole other story.
I have a question for you. Now, this cover story you did for Herald, right? The missing daughters of Pakistan. Right on the front page, right? It says under the headline, what contributes to the alarming rise in women's murder? So I'm going to put that question to you. What is it that contributes to the alarming rise in women's murder? And before I even say that, is it an epidemic, or do you feel that it's simply a case of these things being reported more often?
I guess that's one. I mean, the fact that maybe they're being reported more often is a question that I still have that question, perhaps, and I was thinking that maybe we didn't even, that they didn't come to light before, and perhaps that's the reason. Yeah. But again, I think the question is, the answer is very multidimensional, and I think that's the problem when you set out to answer such questions.
What if we take ego as one factor? You repeatedly mention ego in your story, right? Whether it's the father's ego, whether it's a rejected suitor's ego, whether it's the brother's ego, and I'm just going to point out the Kandil Baloch case for a moment, that the brother's ego was never threatened when Kandil was funding and bankrolling him.
Yeah.
Or when he was unemployed and she was paying the...
Honor was not at stake at that point.
उस वक्त तो गैरत का नाम नहीं आया, वो बाद में आया. So I mean, how much of it is that? How much of it is a case of slighted egos? That they then act on with such terrible consequences.
Right. Again, I think each case is different. In Ambreen's case, for example, I'm not sure whether ego was at stake or not. They say Pervez, he's a suspect. I don't know if he's been convicted, but perhaps the alleged reason for it is because his daughter ran away and Ambreen knew about this. So I'm not sure that you could say that
one links to the other.
One links to the other. Then the mother had very different things. She said that in her case is very interesting. She said immediately she was arrested, she was tortured, her son was tortured. They were prime suspects initially, but then now she's a witness.
At the conclusion, I want to ask the outcome of your investigations or the coverage of all those cases. Did you find out that the police is now more aware and committed to pursue these cases and not to give some special treatment to these killers who kill in the name of so-called honor? Because there was a time when these killers go to jail and people were like, you kill it for honor, the so-called honor that our society somehow is obsessed with. So you think that this attitude of police has changed?
Before you answer, I do have a question to add into it, that while you were on this fact-finding mission from location to location, was the police and the different officials actually helpful?
In the case of Maria Sadaka, they certainly were. I mean, they provided me with the FIR and the postmortem as I requested. In other cases, it was relatively difficult. So it differed from area to area. But to answer your question, for example, in Ambreen's case, for example, they said that part of the reason that the suspicion fell on Ambreen's mother is because she failed to identify Pervez in the police lineup, right? And one of her neighbors, her former neighbors, was sitting there when I was interviewing her, and he said, "Do you know our women don't look up when the men come and speak to them? So a lot of the women don't even recognize the men."
Good point.
And he said that, and I don't understand. So my problem is this, right? Our laws, a lot of them are archaic laws, they're British laws. Even when they are, transmuted to apply to us, there's a disjuncture. It's like, do we not understand our own cultural norms? And that seems very...
And the evolutionary process that has taken place in the last X number of years.
One thing that sort of springs out at me is that in one of the cases, you mentioned that there is a marked gender divide in how the case is being viewed, with most of the women being sympathetic towards the victim and most of the men either denying that it happened in the first place or offering some form of justification. But then, interestingly enough, I mean, in Zeenat Bibi's case and in Muqaddas Bibi's case, the prime suspects are both women.
Right.
And not just women, their own mothers.
Yes. Right.
Now
they're women.
Yeah. Now, I mean, often some activists go like, oh, that's patriarchy, but is that a bit of a cop-out? Because it's a bit of a cop-out as far as I'm concerned.
The way I would answer this, and I do think about this a lot, and especially because when I think about patriarchy or the way I understand it, I feel like it's more of a system rather than a gender. It's almost like when we were kids, I can only speak from personal experience, my father would always say to my brother, stand up straight with your back straight like a man. So it seemed like, you know, he's a boy. What he should be a man, right? Why does he have to aspire to be one, right? Or why is there a conditioning?
Right.
And I think that that's the whole thing about being a mard is actually part of a system that even men, women, everyone aspires to, right? I mean, Maria's father, when he was standing there, he was very emotional at one point, and he said, you know, she was my son. And that's
Khalil Baluch's father said the same thing.
Yeah.
So you
backbone of the family, and he was mere beton ki tarah tha.
And that stuck with me. Like, why does you know, my father would say that. You
my father used to say that about me.
Right. So I don't think that this is to look at it in a form of gender works if we understand how gender is perceived, right? What do we understand about being a woman lies on a spectrum of strength. I think.
Before we end, I need to throw out a question to both of you, since you guys are both obviously practicing television anchors and whatnot.
That's
and the
what
other.
they tell us.
Yeah, sure. You know, the thing is, why are we still continuing, when we all know the answer to this, why are we still continuing to use the term honor killing, whether it's in quotation marks or non-quotation marks? Why are we still continuing to use this terminology? A murder is a murder.
Because no, I know what you're saying. I got your point. Because the bill that has been presented in the parliament by a woman senator says that this bill to eliminate honor killing. So this is something that is written in a law, whether you like it or not.
No, I'm questioning it. It's not about me liking it. I'm not being personal about it. What I'm saying is that, like, look, ghairat ke naam pe qatl ka jab aap loosely translate karenge, so it's obviously going to be honor killing. But it's a completely incorrect terminology.
You know, that is why we say killing for the so-called honor, because just to highlight on the point.
It is a semantic issue. It's an important semantic issue.
But it's a very important one.
But yes, of course, far more important is, of course, to me, you know, the procedural prosecution of these cases. Yes, that needs to change as well. You know,
but it's the polices and it's the officials who also tackle these certain cases. You know, when you're investigating and you're talking to them about it, haan ji, wo to honor killing hai. Like, it's like, you know,
but
you know, and it's a perception issue.
We need to conclude the debate. Finally, one last yes or no from you, because since you've been on ground, you think that these cases will reach its conclusion or not? You have some doubts in your mind that they will be dealt with in a similar manner that they had been in the past?
I don't know. In Maria's case, it seemed it was such a clear case. There was an audio confession statement. There was a video statement. You know, there were witness
so there's no clear yes or no.
But you know, and yet the court ruled that this was a suicide, whereas, you know, her hands are not burned, her head is not burned,
which indicates that she was held down.
And so, you know, when in her case the court can reach such a conclusion, I don't know what to say. I don't have an answer for you.
Okay,
I think that's the answer that I would pose
again,
to
it's a very complicated issue. But thank you, Annie, for doing such a so great piece for the Herald, which has turned as a cover story, and I hope that this feature will further create awareness amongst the people that how these cases are dealt with. Thank you, Alia. Thank you, Zarrar. And so far, so good from ZHK Extra. Goodbye.